Good morning. I'm Saini at the University of Canberra, and I'm in my weekly conversation with Michelle Grattan. Good morning, Michelle.
Hi, Deep.
Michelle, this week there was this special meeting between federal and state leaders, and there was an agreement to toughen the national security laws, particularly the provision for extending the time for which a person can be held for questioning before the charges are laid and so on. Is this really justified?
Well, the aim of this particular measure is to get uniformity across Australia in relation to holding suspects for questioning, but also the government believes that a longer period is necessary. Now, in New South Wales, it's 14 days, and under the proposed change, it will be 14 days across the country. The federal government will legislate for that period, and states can tap into that and also bring in complementary legislation if they desire. So the argument is that with terrorism issues, the authorities need to disrupt, and they don't always have adequate information to take people to court when there's a threat of something happening. They have to jump in, so therefore it's argued that it's necessary to keep suspects for longer. Now, of course, some people contest this, but the police and ASIO are very anxious to have that sort of measure.
Now, related to the same issue, there is the agreement of state governments to hand over the pictures from driver's licenses, and this is to beef up the National Facial Recognition Database. Is this, in your view, an undue infringement of civil liberties?
I don't think so, because the government's not seeking more information or to do different things with the information. They can already access, the Commonwealth that is, can already access this data. But the question that's been at issue is the length of time it takes to get the data. At the moment it can take up to a week, whereas under the new system it would be instantaneous, and that does really, I think, make sense. If someone's apprehended, for example, not just for a terrorism issue but even general crime, it is sensible that the authorities can tap in and quickly get this facial recognition sorted out. There has been some controversy around this, but I think it's probably overblown. Now, obviously, as with other things, there have to be strong safeguards, and there are particularly some concerns about whether this could be hacked into or whatever. You've just got to make sure it's really secure.
But all of that considered, do you think people are getting less concerned over time about civil liberties because there is a heightening concern about terrorism? Is there a relationship between the two? I
think that in people's minds the balance has changed over the last decade. Remember that since September 11 we've had multiple tranches of legislation toughening security laws. It's not just in recent times, it stretches right back, but more and more in recent times. And people do realise that in the world we live in, they are going to forego some rights, some civil liberties. But it's always a question of the balance and the safeguards and making sure that laws are used for the purpose that they're originally intended, that there's not a creeping extension of intrusion without fresh legislative consideration, that there's not a slippery slope, as it were. But given all that, I think that the balance at the moment is reasonable. And one thing that came out of the meeting this week was that state leaders, including Labor state leaders, made the point that in today's world we do have to have some restrictions on civil liberties that we mightn't have contemplated years ago. And I think that that is significant.
Now, continuing with the theme of civil liberties and human rights, the same-sex marriage issue continues in the public domain. and the Statistics Bureau has indicated that nearly 60% of the votes are already in. What does this tell us, and what do you think this means in terms of what the results are likely to be?
I think this tells us that there's a big engagement with this ballot. Remember, at the start of it, many people were saying, oh, well, maybe it'll be a very low turnout rate and people will reject the process, or they won't be interested in the process, or they won't be able to find a post box if they're young. None of this has happened. In fact, the process seems to be working well, and I think we'll continue to see a build, although obviously it'll slow. But when we get results in the coming week, we'll see that it's a very, very respectable turnout rate, and that adds legitimacy, the authority to the result when it comes, and makes it more likely that even people who are on the losing side in this ballot will accept that result. I think it also finally indicates that, given all the polls, the yes vote is likely to be carried by a substantial margin.
Well, thank you, Michelle. I look forward to our next interview. I won't be here next week, but we will speak again in 2 weeks' time.
Good travelling, Deep.
Thank you.